Welcome, everyone. Tonight is a special committee of the whole for the Beverly Public Schools. We are here in the Beverly Middle School Library, and we are welcoming Dr. Jennifer Turner as a candidate for the next superintendent of Beverly Public Schools. It is 7:30 p.m. Today is Monday, April 14th, and I'll just quickly do a roll call. We have Dr. Jeffrey Silva.
Here.
Dr. Kenan Mackenzie DeFranza.
Here.
Ms. Kimberly Coelho.
Here.
Mayor Michael Cahill.
Here.
Ms. Karen Robinson.
Here.
Ms. Lorinda Visnick.
Here.
And I'm Rachel Abel. We are so pleased that you could join us here this evening. BevCam is broadcasting us and hopefully reaching everyone at home. We are so grateful that you came and visited our district all day long. I don't know if you want for your opening remarks to reflect on your day. I trust that you visited each of our school levels, at least. I know we have quite a few more schools that you'd get to know. But if you wouldn't mind giving us your opening remarks, and then the committee has prepared questions, we'll just go around the table.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll ask that you press the green button just so the TV viewers at home can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'll start by telling you just a little bit about myself, who I am, what my journey has been, and why I'm sitting here in front of you today, hoping to be the next superintendent. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about my experience today because I had a great day, a busy day, but a great day. So I have sat in every seat along the way, I like to say. I started teaching middle school in North Reading in a local district, was there for many years. My husband and I moved to Rhode Island, and that journey brought me to Attleboro, where I taught for another couple of years. A little bit of a different approach. I was an English teacher in North Reading. When we moved and I went to Attleboro, I taught humanities. So I was on a two-person team, much like what you have here in the 5th and 6th grade, and I taught English and social studies. At that point in time, I had also earned my master's degree in special education, and so I served as the liaison for students that were on IEPs on my team there in Attleboro. We eventually moved back to this area, and I went back to North Reading. When I was there, I continued to teach English and then became the English department chair and decided to make a shift and pursue a degree in administration. I enrolled in the Educator Leadership Institute and simultaneously felt if I really wanted to be a strong administrator, I needed to utilize that master's in special education a little bit more. So I left North Reading and took a position at Hamilton Wenham High School teaching special education because I wanted, the high school experience, but I also wanted to really dive into that special ed background a little bit more. Completed my degree work and became an administrator, worked in Georgetown as the assistant principal of the middle school there, and then was contacted by my former supervisor in my Leadership Institute, who was working in Lexington at the time, and said, I think we'll have an opening if you're interested. And I said, sure, sounds great. And I became the assistant principal of Clark Middle School in Lexington. Was there for about 6 years and then became the principal at the other middle school across town, which was Diamond. Very controversial. Clark and Diamond were sort of adversaries at that point in time. So that was a big controversial move, but became the principal of Diamond and was there during COVID and also during a major building construction project. So lots of incredible experience that I gained while I was there at Diamond. Finished my doctoral work during that time and decided to pursue a district level position. I only applied to Melrose at the time. I'm a person that really believes that for these kinds of leadership roles, the core values of the person who's interviewing for the role need to match the core values of the district. And the work and the experience that the candidate has done needs to be a match for the work that the district is doing. So when I applied for my current role in Melrose, it was the only place that I applied. And likewise, I'm not casting a huge wide net here. I'm being very particular about places where I'm looking because I want to be in a district where I feel that the core values the district has articulated match my own, and the work and experience that I have will really serve to move this district forward. So what attracted me here to Beverly and why am I here now? I am a relationship-first leader. I really and truly believe in the power of forming trusting relationships with stakeholders. When I took the job at Diamond, my entry plan was titled A Year of Relationships, and I essentially established 2 goals. Bless you. The first was to listen, really and truly listen to the stories of stakeholders so I could understand who Diamond was and who they wanted to be. And the second goal was that I was going to maintain and improve student achievement and performance. Beverly's in a position where we need to do some healing. We need to do some building of trust again. We need to do some building of relationships. And I feel like that is an area of skill and experience that I can bring here to this role. I also took a deep dive into your website and was really impressed by the core values that are articulated there. You talk about ensuring that you are forming inclusive spaces for students to learn academics in a way that is culturally sensitive and proficient, and in a way that allows all learners to feel that their voices are heard and centered. That's work that I've done both in Lexington and in Melrose, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about that tonight as we sort of engage in these questions. But for those reasons, I felt like this was the right step for me and the right place to be, and that's why I applied. Really got to see that in action today. Had some tremendous visits. Started my morning at the preschool where I learned that one little student is having Anna and Elsa at her birthday party this weekend, but not the princesses. I made the mistake of saying, "Oh, from Frozen," and she said, "No, Anna and Elsa, they're right there, and they're coming to my birthday." I said, "Oh, okay, it's not what I thought." But really just a fun group, and it was great to see the interactions of the kids. I saw a lot of play and play with purpose and learning behind it, so that was really nice to see. Then traveled over to Ayers, and while I was in Ayers, a bright, open building, absolutely loved it. Got to see a little bit of Wit and Wisdom in action, learned about the fact that you are in your 4th year of implementation for that literacy program. I've done a lot of literacy work in Melrose, so that was interesting for me to hear, and that you all are using Hegarty as a supplement to Wit and Wisdom. We're also using Hegarty in Melrose as a supplement as well. So some similarities there in terms of experiences that I've had relative to curriculum. Traveled over to the high school, talked with the high school principal about some pathways for success for students. We also talked about civics and civics action work and how that's being implemented at Beverly High School, and then made my way here to the middle school where, after my middle school experience, I felt like I was home a little bit. It was energetic, and there were lots and lots of students in the hall and all about, which was great to see. We talked here about the teaming models. We talked about the differences between 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade. We talked a little bit about some creative scheduling that was taking place. We talked about course offerings for students at the middle school level and some of the challenges with the size of the building and the developmental life of middle schoolers and what that kind of brings to it. So it's been a great day. Met with CPAC representatives, met with some parent representatives, and had some great conversations, really in-depth conversations. I'm incredibly impressed by the questions that were asked and the level of depth and interest that people are taking in this process and in what they want to see in their next leader. So excited to be here tonight to cap the day off.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Visnick, if you wouldn't mind kicking off question number 1.
Fantastic. Kim, don't yell at me. I turned my mic on. Beverly is a rapidly growing community. How will you ensure that all segments of the community are active and engaged? And there's a follow-up to that, which is what ways do you intend to solicit their feedback?
So, I mentioned in my opening that I'm a relationship first leader. And for me, what that means is prioritizing open, honest, transparent communication. And I think that communication has to be two-way communication. A big part of communicating effectively is really listening to what people are experiencing, their lived experiences with being part of the Beverly community and being part of the Beverly School District. So the way in which I would go about engaging them is by building some solid systems and structures for that communication to take place. And I think those systems and structures need to look a little bit different depending on which stakeholders we're talking about. So when I think about students and communicating with students, I always want student voice on committees as much as possible. So I would invite that participation in committees that we're running within the district. It's important for me to be present, and it's important for me to be in classrooms, seeing the work that students are doing. And even the younger students, when I walked through classrooms this morning, I was asking them, what are you working on? Tell me what you're doing. What's your favorite part about this class? Engaging in those conversations and really getting to know students. When I think about families, I reflect on some of what I've done relative to communication with families in my previous experience. As a principal, I had a weekly newsletter. For us, the best method of communication, and this was feedback I got from the community, was to create a Google site because I could update it in live time and families had that link saved. So they didn't have to wait for my Friday email that came around every week. They could access it at any time. And if I made changes, it was updated in real time. That newsletter, that website, served to provide not just communication I needed to push out, but built-in ways for them to offer feedback by joining committees, completing surveys, having meetings, and talking about what was happening. And then an additional thing that I did to really strengthen that was I asked my PTO if they would be willing to host coffees in their home. And they did. And it was incredibly successful and one of the best ways, truly, that I got to know the families in Lexington when I was serving as principals. So what they did was they reached out to volunteers who offered to host events in their home where they would serve coffee and refreshments, and we would just sit and talk very casually about whatever was on their mind. And for a lot of families, that was convenient because they were working during the day, and so participating in other ways was created some barriers, but it was casual enough that they could be really honest and open with me about what they were feeling and what they were experiencing. And so a lot of things that ended up becoming initiatives that we were going to implement or move forward came from those coffees that I held in the community in people's homes. In terms of the community at large, I was talking with the families about this earlier. I'm a big believer in the power of PR, and I don't know that as school districts we're really good at that, and I think that we need to be better at doing some PR, especially as it relates to budget and some challenges that we are likely going to face with our budgets going forward. It's important that community members, even those who don't have children in the Beverly Public Schools, know the work we're doing. So we need to be out there sharing the work that we're doing. I love to see students at community events, and I love to bring community events to the schools as much as possible so that we're really forging those connections between local community organizations and the work that our students are doing. I love to, sort of brand things. So to think about what's most important for us and our core values and have that be visible everywhere so that anybody in the community who you ask what the Beverly Public Schools stand for can tell you. And they can say, I know what they're all about because they put it out there for me. And they're willing to communicate that. So for me, that is how we ensure that all segments of the community are heard. I think it's about finding the unique ways to communicate that will work for that particular group. And it's about ensuring that that communication is two-way and that we are inviting those conversations as much as possible.
Great, thank you. Ms. Robinson.
Thank you. So could you please share with us some innovative ways you plan to recruit and retain high-quality educators, especially in a time when fewer young people are going into teaching? How will you support veteran staff facing burnout due to increasing demands and limited resources?
Sure. I'm going to tackle this in two different parts because I think that they're really two very different questions in some ways. We have a tremendous opportunity here in Massachusetts and here where we are in Beverly because we've got some great colleges and universities right in our backyard that we can connect with to bring new teachers into the field and to support their growth and development. I've done a lot of that work in Melrose. We've also done a lot of work in Melrose with leadership programs for our existing staff. So I've partnered with Salem State. We brought a CAGS program for future educational leaders on site in Melrose so that teachers didn't have to travel to participate in the program. We're actually hosting the cohort there. I'm also going to be teaching a course for Salem State on budgeting in the spring, and I'm going to be teaching a course for Endicott in the spring as well. So making those university and college connections is huge. Another thing that we've done in Melrose that has been incredibly successful is we've worked with Salem State to bring paraprofessionals who are doing their student teaching to Melrose. So we pay them and we hire them as paraprofessionals who are very difficult to find these days. So this is a great resource for us. And during that time, they complete their practicum hours to earn their teaching licensure. Most of the candidates who come to us through that program stay, and we're able to move them into full-time teaching roles at that point. So again, it's a great way to recruit candidates and to bring candidates to the district. That said, I want to be very transparent that the reason why teachers go to districts is because of what work is happening in the district. We have to be a district that teachers want to come to because we are prioritizing students, we are prioritizing student safety, we are prioritizing equity, we are creating inclusive spaces where people feel that their voices will be heard. That's what's going to really and truly recruit teachers to come here to Beverly. It's not like a private business where we can offer some great, high salary to kind of entice them. So we have to make sure that our environment is a place where people want to be. And I'll kind of segue that into the supporting of veteran teachers. I don't want to, overstate this, but I think it's incredibly important. If teachers are feeling burnout, it's my responsibility to listen to why that's happening and to truly hear what they think needs to change in order to curb that burnout and support them in a better way. Resources don't always have to be financial. There doesn't always have to be a cost to resources. A very small thing that I did as a principal, but it helped in a lot of ways. When teachers were feeling burnt out, I used to put myself out for a sub on call. If you need a break, let me know. I'll come and cover your class for you, and you can do whatever you need to do. And teachers knew that they could use that option if they felt like they were having a difficult week or a difficult day, and they just needed a block to kind of take a breath and pause. It's a small thing, but it went a long way in terms of building trust and building those relationships that we had to demonstrate that I understood that burnout was real and that they really needed that time to kind of decompress and get back into doing the tremendous work that they were doing with kids. So when we talk about teachers that are facing burnout, it's incumbent upon us to find out why that's happening and then to think about creative solutions for supporting them. And those creative solutions don't always have to be monetary. In Melrose, one of the ways in which we incentivize teachers to stay is through providing professional development points that they can eventually use for salary upgrade. So there's an eventual monetary cost there, but we provide those incentives through our professional development catalog. We give lots and lots of opportunities for teachers to engage in professional development, and they earn credits that they can eventually use for salary upgrade. So it's about thinking about why are they feeling this burnout, and what can I do as the leader of the district to curb that in some way.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
Sure. Dr. Turner, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. How would you address bullying, discrimination, and harassment at the district level in terms of protocol and expectations for those at the building level and for central office in terms of responses?
So I've done a lot of work regarding bullying prevention and intervention and harassment and things that fall in that realm. Some of it by choice and some of it by circumstance, quite frankly. In my current role, we have a very scaled back HR department. And so when concerns are raised around harassment, oftentimes it falls on my plate to conduct those investigations. When I first started in Melrose, our bullying prevention and intervention plan was significantly outdated and hadn't been reviewed in quite some time. So I wrote the district's newest bullying prevention and intervention plan. I modeled it on previous work I had done in Lexington. I also modeled it on the state plan that they provide districts to support that work. I'm going to kind of take the two things because they're a little bit separate in my mind. Bullying prevention and intervention, for me, is really about ensuring that we have educational programs in place in all of the schools that are comprehensive and will prevent things from happening as much as possible. So I'm familiar with, and we've used Responsive Classroom at the elementary level, which I know that you all have used. Second Step. In Melrose, we also use the Olveus curriculum. In my previous experience in Lexington, we've also implemented Rachel's Challenge. And I have a really great story I'll share. I shared with one of the groups that I met with tonight about Rachel's Challenge, but I'll come back to that. So for me, it's about having those solid plans in place so that we are doing as much education and prevention work as we possibly can before things become an issue. We also need to have solid reporting mechanisms. We need to make sure that the public knows how to report incidents of bullying when they happen. We need to make sure that there's a vehicle that they can report anonymously. I did read your plan. I know you have those vehicles on your website. A wondering I would have is, do the parents know how to find that easily? Can they access it when they need to in the moment? And then I think we need to support each other. It is not uncommon for administrators or educational leaders to conduct an investigation relative to bullying, to get to the end of the investigation and realize something happened here, and this does fall under the realm of bullying, and not really be 100% sure what to do next. I think it's okay to lean on each other in those situations, to pull together a team and say, here's the situation, what do you think is the best solution? I also think we have to be really clear and communicative about what solutions are appropriate when. I wrote my dissertation on restorative justice practices, and I've done a lot of research in terms of restorative justice practices. They're amazing when they're appropriate. they can do harm when they're used in an inappropriate way and when they're implemented at a time where the parties are not ready or willing to do that work. So I think it's important that we're engaging in these conversations with one another so that we're choosing the right response when things happen and we determine that there has been some harm that has been caused. And then following an incident, it's important that we're talking about how we heal from that harm. We can't just expect that, there's been a response or a consequence has been put into place, and we're just going to move forward as if nothing happened. There's often a next step that gets overlooked, and that is about how do we repair that harm and rebuild some of what might have been hurt in the community, because the community might be feeling unsafe after there's been an incident. I want to share just a little story about an experience I had, and I shared it earlier, but to me it really sort of spoke to how we can think about these situations in creative ways and find good resolutions. When I was working in Lexington, we had adopted Rachel's Challenge, which is based on Rachel Joy Scott, who was one of the Columbine victims. And Rachel had written a quote in one of her journals or somewhere in her room that said, something along the lines of, imagine if we all just started a chain of kindness, how different the world could be. And so accepting Rachel's challenge meant that as a district, we were committing to starting this chain reaction of kindness. And we were pledging that we were going to be doing this work in our school. So as part of accepting the challenge, they sent us a banner probably as large as that table. And kids were able to sign the banner to make their commitment to accepting the challenge and being a part of this chain of kindness that we were going to spread. We had the banner in our cafeteria during multiple lunches. By the time we got to the end of the third lunch, somebody had put, an arrow towards somebody's signature and written something very unkind about that person. And then another person saw that and did the same thing. And I think we ended up with about 3 of those things that were written on that banner about students who had signed the banner previously. So I was faced with, a challenge. What do? I'm the leader of this building. We've had this harm caused. I don't know how many other kids have seen this. I don't know if the students who the arrow was pointing to have seen this. And, this is supposed to be a commitment to doing the exact opposite, right? To spreading kindness. So what I decided to do was, rather than taking the traditional route of this major investigation, I got the student council president and the student council cabinet of officers. And I pulled them together and said, this is your school, this is our school, and there's this harm that has been done by what's written on this banner. What do? And they got together in a room for probably a good hour. And I did listen at the door when they were talking, but they talked for a good hour about what they could do to change the trajectory of what had happened. And ultimately, they came up with an incredibly comprehensive plan. They came out to me and they said, okay, here's what we need to do. First, we need to let everybody in the building know that this was not acceptable and that we will not tolerate this. So we'd like to have team meetings, and we would like to speak as the student council about the importance of not engaging in this kind of behavior towards one another and about the harm that it caused and what we need to do to repair the harm. They were using middle school language, so I'm using my language, but that's essentially what they said they wanted to do. They also said they wanted to raise funds to purchase another banner. We didn't make them raise the funds. We were able to get another banner, but we thought that was a great idea as well. And then they said, and when we put this next banner out for people to sign, we're going to staff it with student council members who are there with the banner as kids are signing so that they'll know we're making sure that they don't do anything like that again and that there's not any inappropriate writing that was on the banner. So to me, that was a great way of handling a situation that really could have been very ugly and very hurtful, because it was something that students came up with, and the kids who did that certainly knew that what they did was wrong after their peers held meetings where they talked about how that's not what we do around here. That's not the kind of community that we want to be a part of, and that's not the kind of community that we're going to be accepting of. The kids who did that certainly knew that they had caused some harm when a new banner arrived and everybody had to make a second commitment and a second pledge to Rachel's challenge. But they were able to learn from their mistakes and move on without feeling embarrassed or without feeling like they were ostracized because they had made a difficult choice. Middle schoolers make bad choices sometimes, and they need to learn from that. So to me, that was an example of how we can take something that's a really difficult situation and really kind of think creatively around it. But again, to go back to my original point, we need to have clear protocols in place. We need to make sure everybody understands what those protocols are. In the case of harassment, do our staff and do our community members know who to go to and how to report? That's got to be incredibly clear. And then we have to support administrators in conducting those investigations. And if they get to the end of the investigation and don't know what to do, we have to make that okay for them to ask for help and support so that we can put our heads together to come up with what the best solution might be.
Ms. Coelho, would you ask the next question, please?
This has two parts to it. How would you approach the district's desire to improve and maintain high academic achievement? And what are some of the core competences that our students need to master? A, before they get to high school, and B, before they graduate?
Sure. So I am big into really using data to determine what our next steps are. I think that data sometimes gets a bad rap. We see it as a dirty word. It's not. Data is just information, and there's lots of different data that we can be looking at, including, of course, state testing, but also classroom data, subjective data from our teachers and what they're reporting that they're seeing in terms of academic performance and growth. And we need to make decisions that are based on those data points. A couple of things I did in Melrose to really increase how we use data. I wrote a grant for $129,000, actually. It was a great grant that provided, we were able to contract with an organization called Hanover Research, who came in and gave data analysis literacy training to our entire leadership team and then to our entire staff across the district. We did that not because I didn't think staff knew how to analyze data, but we needed a common language, and we needed for there to be a common understanding of how we were going to approach looking at student data and discussing what we were seeing. So the plan that we came up with was describe, interpret, plan. We asked staff to describe what they were seeing, to ask the why and interpret why they thought they were seeing that, and then to make a plan. We then transitioned all of our data team meetings over to the buildings so that our building principals could be instructional leaders and lead the charge of looking at that data to make academic decisions about what we need to do moving forward. Doing that ensures that we're really kind of working on that academic achievement. You know, I think there's also lots of other tools at our disposal that sometimes we forget about. One of my favorite tools is on the DESE website, and that's the Standards Navigator. So I am constantly encouraging my teachers to use that Standards Navigator. It's a tool that basically allows you to pull up a particular grade level standard, and it will show you what the prerequisite standards are that students have to have mastered in order to access the grade level standard, and it will also show you what's coming next. So if you're looking at a 5th grade standard, it will show you what the student would have needed to do in 4th grade in order to be able to access that 5th grade standard, and then it will show you what they're going to do at that standard in 6th grade. So when we're talking about encouraging academic achievement and ensuring that things are happening, it's a great tool for staff to get really comfortable using to make sure that they're actually teaching what's in the standard and that they have an understanding of where students have been and where students need to go. And that kind of transitions into the second part of your question. Using tools like that helps us to know what core competencies students need to have mastered before they get into high school and then, of course, after they graduate. I also took a look at your vision of a graduate. Your vision of the graduate defines exactly what we want students to be able to do. And what's interesting, and this is the case with many visions of a graduate, it doesn't really talk about specific academic skills, right? It talks about who we want for our students to be as people. So you have a problem solver who thinks critically. What does that look like in practice, right? Exhibits responsibility and empathy in both attitude and behavior. Understands the importance of inclusivity and community engagement, and pursues a post-secondary plan that supports skills and interests. So interesting that those competencies aren't about, knows a certain level of math, right? Or has achieved a certain world language proficiency. Those things are important, of course, and we hope that students will pursue those academic endeavors, but it's really about who are they as human beings, and are they ready to engage in a global society where they're going to be learning new things all the time, and they're going to be continuing to develop no matter what field they choose to go into. So I think if we start with that vision of a graduate, which is where we want our kids to be when they leave us at the end of their experience here, and work backwards from there, we can find exactly what those benchmarks are for competencies that we want students to have before they get into the high school or before they get into the middle school. And a lot of it is really about having the flexibility and the mindset to engage in learning, more so than a particular math level or a particular ELA level, right? It's really about being able to access learning, being able to engage in academic dialogue, being able to ask questions, being able to know when they need to seek help and how to seek help in a way that will be productive for them. It's about, going back to the anti-bullying question that was just asked, it's about showing empathy for others and understanding that they play a role as a part of this community and what that role is. It's about understanding that there are people in the community and outside of the community who don't look like them, who don't think like them, and that's actually a gift and an opportunity for them to learn more about the world around them in the world in which they're going to engage post-graduation. So for me, those core competencies are really about those soft skills, I'll call them, that students need in order to be successful students, both when they're with us and beyond. Now, I don't want to sort of skirt the question a little bit. I am a huge curriculum person. That's the work I do now, is curriculum and instruction. So I do think that there are some literacy skills that students need to have mastered in order to be successful secondary students. We need to make sure that our instruction at the early grades is teaching kids not only how to decode and encode, but that we're also focusing on vocabulary development and comprehension. We also need to focus on building background knowledge so that as they encounter more difficult, challenging texts at the secondary level, they have the background knowledge and the experience to unpack those texts and analyze them to the best of their ability. We need to be increasing the rigor in writing that we're doing with students and providing very specific feedback about student writing, again, so that by the time they get to their secondary pursuits, they feel very comfortable engaging in extensive writing tasks for different audiences. So persuasive writing, narrative writing, writing for a real world situation, writing a letter to someone, all sorts of different audiences as well. In mathematics, we need to be working on conceptual understanding with students, not just procedural fluency. So, what does that mean and what does that look like? Students should be able to visualize the math that they're doing and understand why they're applying a particular formula. Again, so when they get to those secondary levels where they're engaging in really complex mathematical experiences, they have an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. So in the younger grades, we would want to see things like manipulatives in a classroom. We would want to see multiple means for solving a problem. We would want to hear math dialogue happening between students and between the student and teacher. We would want to hear students defending their process, even if the answer maybe isn't correct, but defending the process that they went through. So those are things that we want to see, again, to prepare them for that secondary and that post-secondary experience as well. And I'm a big advocate for world languages. We are one of the only countries that doesn't prioritize speaking multiple languages, and I think it's incredibly important. So for me, a core competency is also engaging in another language. And if it's a student who perhaps isn't ready to learn to speak another language, can we capitalize on learning about the culture of the world around us and learning about the culture of the countries in which other languages are spoken? Can we capitalize on the opportunity to learn about why speaking multiple languages opens doors for people in the future? And can we do something creative like teach ASL? We've had a big push to teach ASL in Melrose, and it's been very, very widely received. So that's another competency that I would like to see. So again, those soft skills to me are very important, and they're articulated in your vision of a graduate. So I know they're important here as well. And then, of course, backing that up with some academic rigor.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mackenzie DeFranza.
Thank you. After an historic teacher strike in Beverly, how would you go about not only building trust between educators and district leadership, but also addressing non-monetary concerns that led to the strike and build morale in our schools? The second part of that question is, what concrete steps will you take to ensure that teachers are not only heard, but actively involved in decision-making processes?
Mm-hmm. So again, this is actually one of the reasons why I decided to pursue this role here in Beverly. I am very much a relationship-first leader. I believe in the power of relationships, and as I mentioned earlier, I believe that we form those relationships by starting with open, honest, transparent communication that is two-way. That means really truly listening to the experiences and the stories that people have and trying to understand how those experiences and how those stories impact what they are feeling now in this moment. So when we talk about non-monetary things that are happening, I want to know what those are, why they came to the surface, how they feel about those things now, how is the healing process going? Do they feel there are still issues that need to be addressed? What are suggestions they have for how we can address it? How can we come together collaboratively to work towards solutions that are palatable for all parties that are involved? They're difficult conversations to engage in, but they're incredibly important. And I think that's how we're going to start to rebuild trust with one another and move forward. Another piece of building trust, in my opinion, is demonstrating competence. When things happen, and they will happen, if I take this role, things will happen. There will be challenges that I will face probably very early on. There will be difficult decisions that will need to be made. I will need to take a stand on certain issues and demonstrate my leadership in a way that shows people that I'm competent. Once I've done that a few times, people will start to feel confident that I have their back and that we are a community and that we are working together to move forward in a way that feels productive and is productive so that we can heal from what happened and come together to rebuild that trust. You know, I shared that for me at Diamond, my entire entry plan was formed around that. And I really, really mean it when I say I took the time to let people tell me their history of work for the last 20 years in the building and what that change had looked like and what they had been through, and to really understand how what they were experiencing now, for me, maybe didn't seem like a big deal because I'm not experiencing it and that's not the lens of perception I have. But for them, it really brought with it some deep-rooted hurt and some deep-rooted feelings about what we needed to do to move forward. So I needed to listen to that and understand that. And I think that's going to be the same here in Beverly, that it will really be up to me to pull people together and to listen to what they're experiencing, not rehashing the story and what happened. We don't have to do that, but really to understand how that felt and what they experienced during it so that we can identify areas where we can move forward together. We have common interests. We have shared interests. We have shared goals. We have common goals. Focusing on those shared goals and those common goals and focusing on students first is a way to begin to address some of the harm that has been caused and some of what we need to do in order to move forward. I want to share just a little story about building relationships, and it's a story that has to do with building relationships with students, but I think it speaks to how I put myself out there in a community and how I let people know who I am and sort of what I believe in. In Lexington, you know, I had the privilege in both of the middle schools in which I worked. We had 5 special education programs. And so I worked with students who were on the autism spectrum and were nonverbal. I worked with students who had cognitive disabilities. I worked with students in the language-based program, moderate special needs, lots of different programs. That was over a decade ago. This past summer, I was at a Best Buddies event, and I saw a young man walk by me, and I said, "Oh, Zachary." And he stopped and looked at me and said, "Mrs. Turner, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in over 10 years. And he gave me a big hug. And it turned out that he was part of a cohort of about 5 boys who were in one of our more severe special education programs when I was in Lexington. And they are now a part of a rock band called the Rockstar Graduates. You can look them up online and hire them for your next event. And they were about to go on stage and perform for the Best Buddies finish line of the race that Best Buddies does down in the Cape. And one of the moms saw me and came running over. And again, it had been over 10 years since I had worked with this group of students. She came running over and said, "I can't believe you're here. Thank goodness, because Christian won't go on stage." I walked over and I said, "Christian, tell me what's going on." And he looked up with surprise and said, "Mrs. Turner, it's so good to see you." "Oh no, you're going to make me go on that stage, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am. That's why you're here. I know you can do it." And sure enough, he got up on that stage and he played the drums and sang his heart out. And we sang and we danced, and I took pictures and sent it to their teacher that I worked with 10 years ago. But, this is a decade later. And these are kids that remembered me. The parents remembered me. I remembered every one of their names. We sang, we danced, we had a great time, because really and truly, I take the time to go and to listen to people and to be a part of what their experience is in the school district. And for staff here, in the community here, families who have been through a really difficult time, it's going to require a lot of my presence and a lot of my listening to understand that hurt and be able to come up with a plan to move forward. One of the things I heard earlier when I met with families was that now they're thinking not just about kind of that harm healing, but they're thinking about moving forward with purpose to do some academic recovery for some of the learning that was lost during the time of the strike. So that's something to be considered, and that's something that coming in as a new superintendent, I would want to keep on the forefront of my mind is not only how are we healing and building relationships, but what are we doing about some of the lingering problems that we're going to have to deal with because of what happened. And that was one that was raised tonight that I would be interested in working on. So.
And Dr. Silva, if you could take the next question.
Thank you. So like most districts right now, Beverly is facing budgetary challenges. Can you talk about how you've handled budgeting in tough financial times? Have you used a needs-based or zero-based approach? For example, do you work with your team to figure out what type of staffing or programs are essential? And how do you make sure these decisions are aligned with district goals and made transparent?
Sure. I'm going to dig into my Melrose experience because I've been in Melrose for 3 years. We've had 3 different superintendents with 3 very different leadership styles. And we have had, I started my first year with it, there was a $2 million budget gap. We're now at a budget deficit of about $4.6 million. So lots and lots of experience with creating and recreating budgets and really finding creative ways to address budget shortfalls during very difficult times. I've done both needs-based budgets and zero-based budgets. My work has been really in a supportive role, working with the superintendents on how we can develop that needs-based and that zero-based budget. And in particular, last year, when we had an interim superintendent, I had a seat at the table every time there was a conversation taking place about budget. So even as an assistant superintendent, I felt like I was a major part of the decision-making. And what we did last year was we actually created 3 different versions of the budget. So we were clear with the community about what our needs were and what it actually cost for us to address all of our needs. And then we showed them 2 other versions of, what would happen if we had a level funded budget and what would happen if we needed to make cuts. So I've had experience in all of those areas. For me, as an assistant superintendent, another thing that I spent a lot of time doing since I came on board in Melrose is restructuring the teaching and learning budget. When I came on board, we had what I'll call buckets of funds that were given by the city and allocated to the teaching and learning department and then sort of used as needed. And for me, I had no idea how to forecast with that kind of budgeting. I had no idea how to predict what needs might come up towards the end of the year and whether or not we'd have enough money to pay for those needs. So I immediately developed a line item budget that was extremely transparent and listed out every need that I knew we were going to have and how much those needs were going to cost. Each year since then, I have worked from that line item budget with my team of directors to fine tune and be creative around how we fund the things that we actually need in the teaching and learning department in order to keep our academics on track. Creative budgeting is hard. There are some things that can be done. Through the teaching and learning lens, I learned how to negotiate really well with contractors and with curriculum products. They want our business, they need our business, they know that schools are in financial difficult times, and they are willing to engage in conversations about creative pricing structures. So I've done a lot of that work with contractors and with curriculum publishers and publishing companies. I mentioned earlier that I love to look at data. A lot of our decisions about what stays and what goes comes down to data. What is the data telling us about the tools and the products that we're using? And the ones that aren't demonstrating any level of efficacy need to go, right? They need to go. We've also worked to bring things in-house. So for example, we used to use a product that allowed for us to have diagnostic assessments and then a personalized learning path for students after they took a diagnostic assessment. The personalized learning path of that product was like over $100,000, and it became way out of our budget and we weren't able to sustain it. So we eliminated that part of it, but then worked with our building leaders to replace that with classroom instruction that looked a little bit different. And we built up some internal professional development so that staff who previously had relied on that tool had some tools in their tool belt to work with students to kind of replace what was happening there. So those are some things that I've done in terms of budget, and working with my team to figure out what programs are essential. We've had in Melrose, let me go back, I apologize. So last year we did a needs-based budget, we did a level funded budget, and then we did what would happen if we had to zero out. This year our superintendent started with a zero out budget. We knew we were coming into the year with a $4.6 million deficit. We had a failed override last year, and so the needs-based budget was not on the table. I'm not sure that's the approach I would have taken, but that's the approach that was taken, and I support that because that's my role, is to be supportive of that. So we started with zero out. Zero out's really hard because you are immediately talking about eliminating things, programs, instructional tools, and staff. Melrose, and I think Beverly is in a similar situation, is probably 90% of our budget is staff. So when we have to make cuts, that's where the cuts come from, and it is extremely hard and extremely painful. Our conversations at the leadership table this year have really been about what is absolutely essential for students to be safe and what is absolutely essential for our students to be able to access curriculum in a way that is going to continue to move academic performance forward. And that's how we've made decisions. We've done a lot of restructuring. We've explored lots and lots of different models. We've done a lot of reach out to other districts who have engaged in restructuring, and we've talked with other districts about what has worked and what hasn't worked for them. And I think that's really, at this point, all that you can do. But from my perspective and my lens, creative budgeting to me is about leaning on other districts to come up with solutions to support one another. Are there programs in other public schools around us that we don't have that we could tuition kids into rather than tuitioning them into a private school? Do we need to consider purchasing our own transportation so that we take transportation in-house to save some transportation costs? Do we build special education programs in district? Would serve two purposes: keep kids included in the community, but also help to reduce the cost of out-of-district placements. Are we using our grant funds in the best possible way? Are we applying for public grants? Are we applying for private grants? Are we looking to contractors who can support us in that work? Because often, although there's an upfront cost to that, it's saving us a lot of money in the long run if they're able to support us in finding those grants that will be available. So those things are all things that are important, and those are all things that I consider as I'm looking at a budget and trying to figure out what's going on. And then the last thing that I'll say that I think, especially coming in as a new superintendent, is going to be incredibly important is using the resources that Massachusetts offers. We're very lucky that we have organizations like the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, MASBO, MASC, who will support superintendents across the Commonwealth in advocating at the state level to change some of these funding formulas to support districts in a different way. And it's going to be essential that I take advantage of those supports and work with my colleagues in other districts to advocate at the state level and to be a part of those campaigns that are working to really look at how schools are being funded on the state level.
Thank you. For the next question, if you could please explain what is your experience with curriculum development, and as superintendent, how will you ensure the highest quality instruction in all classrooms and consistently throughout the district?
Sure. So this is the world in which I live right now. I oversee all curriculum, instruction, and assessment for the Melrose Public Schools. I oversee all of the program review processes. I oversee the team of directors. When we had instructional coaches, which we don't anymore, I oversaw the instructional coaches and the work that they did with our educators to support them in supporting our students. So in terms of curriculum development, that's the work that I've been doing for the last 3 years. A few things that are really important. We need to ensure that we have high quality instructional materials in all grades and in all subject areas. Those high-quality instructional materials can be either purchased products or homegrown. I do believe that both can be successful. In Lexington, we used a lot of homegrown curriculum that we wrote on our own. In Melrose, we tend to use a lot of products. Both approaches work. It depends on the needs of the district and what is going to work best for the district. The danger with homegrown products is that there's often bias that is built in. And so sometimes, especially if I'm seeing data that shows subgroup disproportionality, that signals to me that there might be bias in the curriculum that we're using, and we need to rely on a product that has gone through really extensive bias checks to ensure that that's not happening. We had in Melrose a 2-year program review process, and then there were 6 years in between program reviews, which to me felt like way too long. A lot changes in 6 years, and we need to be looking at curriculum on a more regular basis than that large gap. So we expanded in Melrose the program review process to be a multi-year process where we're sort of never out of the review. It looks different when we're in year 1 than year 4 or year 5. Year 4 or year 5 is really about assessing efficacy by looking at data and looking to see if there are trends in the data that might signal to us we need to make some curricular changes. Year 1 might be, what are the changes? Are we piloting programming? Are we looking to bring something new in? That might be what year 1 or year 2 looks like. As part of that program review process, in just 3 years, I've led 2 different pilots. I led a pilot of illustrative math in the middle school level. It's a very conceptual program that really focuses on those math skills I talked about earlier in terms of making the learning of math visible so that people understand the why behind the mathematics. And we also piloted in our 6th grade My Perspectives, which is the secondary version of the literacy program that we implemented my first year in Melrose. So we saw success in our data with the implementation of our MyView literacy curriculum program and decided this past year that we wanted to pilot the secondary version. So in just the 3 years that I've been in Melrose, we've had 2 pilots, which is a lot, which is a large, major curriculum initiative. We have also changed the way in which we do our diagnostic testing. As I mentioned earlier, we used to use a product that allowed for diagnostic testing and then personalized learning. We've had to change that personalized learning path and shift to just using the diagnostic. But one of probably the most powerful tools that we've used in Melrose is identifying what we consider to be best practice in regards to pedagogy. So you can have the best high quality curriculum in the world, but if the pedagogy isn't there, if the instruction isn't targeted, if the instruction isn't personalized, if we're not centering marginalized voices, if kids don't feel that they're represented, if the experiences aren't relevant and interesting, if we don't have multiple points of access, if we're not challenging those students that are on the higher end of achievement, then the best curriculum in the world isn't going to resolve any of our issues. So for me, as important as the curriculum is what's happening instructionally in our classrooms. What are we doing to ensure that all students can access rigorous grade level standards at high levels? Again, I'll highlight that Standards Navigator tool because I love it, and I love to support staff in looking to see, are they addressing the standard? Are they going backwards if they need to, and how are they moving forward to push kids to the next level? As a superintendent, I would want to continue to do that supportive role. I'd want to look at the systems and structures that we have in place for program reviews, for data collection, for analyzing that data to make decisions about curriculum and instruction. I would want to talk with our building leaders about supervision and evaluation and what's happening in those conversations with teachers around the instruction that they're seeing in their classrooms. I love the idea of instructional rounds, which are a non-evaluative way for groups of teams to walk through classrooms and see the instruction that's happening and engage in conversations about that instruction. I'm a big advocate for targeting those instructional rounds. So one of the things I did in Melrose was I invited secondary teachers to tour elementary classrooms because the elementary school is doing a tremendous job implementing small groups and centers. And then that sort of fizzles out as kids get into the secondary level. And it's a great tool for providing some level of differentiation within a classroom. So we brought secondary teachers down to the elementary schools to see those small groups in action. So I would advocate for instructional rounds. as a way for us to really be looking at the instruction that's happening in our building. And then I need to work closely with the directors, the department heads, the experts in each of those subject areas to ensure that we have robust curriculum and instruction happening across the board in all grades and all subjects.
Thanks. Ms. Visnick, would you take the next?
Thank you, Madam President. There is, unfortunately, a national movement challenging diversity, equity, and inclusion in the public schools related to race, gender, LGBTQ plus identities. Federal funding, inclusive curriculum, and educators' careers are being challenged. As a potential superintendent, can you share an example of when you have taken or would be willing to take a professional risk to uphold the human and civil rights of students and staff?
Sure. I want to talk a little bit about the why this is really important, and then I'll delve into the how and share an example. You know, we have a moral imperative to do this work because it is what is best for students, for families, and for our community. We cannot possibly say that we believe in an inclusive, safe environment if we're not willing to stand firm and do this work. We just can't. It is not a safe environment if students can't come into a classroom and be themselves. It is not a safe environment if students feel that they can't identify as who they truly are because they fear retribution or bullying or harm. That is not a safe, inclusive environment, and we can't say that we're promoting that if we're not willing to take a stand and do that work on a regular basis. So for me, when we talk about things like DEI, it's not an add-on. It's not an initiative. I almost really have to question when I hear the narrative coming from outside noise around, are we going to be eliminating DEI initiatives? I always have to stop and say, I don't even know what that would look like, because to me, that is just the work we do on a regular basis. That is who we have to be as a community. It's not an add-on that we can eliminate. We're not going to eliminate students and staff and families feeling safe in Beverly to be who they are. We're not going to tolerate classroom settings where students aren't seeing themselves represented in the curriculum, where students aren't seeing themselves represented in their teachers and in their leaders, where students don't feel that they can be who they truly are. That is not an initiative that we erase. That is just part of who we are and why we do the work that we do. You know, I think there is often this pushback or fear that if we're supporting a particular group, it's at the expense of another group. And I just don't believe that that's true or has to be true. You know, I used the analogy earlier in one of the groups that I was meeting with that to me, it's like when you have more than one child or more than one pet, right? You have your first child and you love that child more than anything in the entire world. You can't imagine loving anything the way in which you love that first child. And then you decide to have a second child. You don't take half of that love away from the first one to give to the second one. Your love just doubles. And you're able to give that second child that same amount of love, and you give them what they need. And it looks different probably than what you gave the first child, but you're not taking away from the first child to do it. And I think it's incredibly important that when we're talking about human rights issues, like feeling that you belong in a community, that we stress we are not taking away from one group to give to another. That's not how this works. Everybody can live in a place where they feel safe and included. We're not taking away from one to give to another. I'm going to share an example that I've shared before, but it's just the example that comes to my mind whenever this is raised. So I'm going to share it again. When I was a principal, I had a parent question. It started as a question about curriculum. We were doing a 6th grade literature circles unit. The unit was on identity, and so there were 5 or 6 novels that students could choose from who all had main characters who had gone through some kind of an identity challenge in the course of the book. The authors were also diverse authors. I had a parent who, first went to the teacher and said, I don't want my child reading any of these books. None of these books are things that my child can relate to. It then went through, the department head level and ultimately landed on my desk. And so I met with the parent. First thing I did was ask, which book did the child select? And I read the book. Tremendous book. There was absolutely nothing that was not age appropriate in the book. It was a wonderful story about a middle school student coming of age and learning how to cope with the loss of one of his parents. He had a single parent, and in the course of the book, he had to learn how that was going to be a different experience for him than maybe some of his peers who had two parents in the home. That was what the book was about. So we sat down with this parent, and the first thing I said was, "Did you read the book that your child chose?" And the answer was no. So it's a hard conversation to start when you haven't even read the book. But that taught me a lot about what I needed to know about how the rest of the conversation was going to go. And the rest of the conversation went something like this. He said things like, "No, I didn't read this book, and I'm not going to read any of these books. I read about the authors, and that's all I need to know." He repeatedly told me that none of the books were about normal families and that he wanted there to be a book about a normal family. And I challenged him. I said, "Please tell me what a normal family is in your definition." We engaged in probably an hour-long, incredibly difficult dialogue about what he felt was a standard for a family unit, and that he felt that students should only be reading about his standard of what a family unit should be. And at the end of it, I had a decision as a principal. Do I allow for this child to read something else or to opt out of the unit? What do I do? And at the end of the conversation, what I said was, thank you for engaging in this dialogue. That is not what we believe here at Diamond Middle School. We used DRUM as our PBIS acronym, and the D stood for diversity. The U stood for unity. I said, I cannot sit here in front of you and say that we are promoting a diverse environment that is united. The M was mindful, where people are mindful of one another, and also say that you don't have to read about families that might have a structure that's different than yours. So which book would your child like to read? And I'm happy to support your child and you in whatever way I can through reading the book. And the child did. He read the book that he had initially selected and, didn't need support or resources. He was actually fine through the whole thing. But it stuck with me that, wow, we have a long road ahead of us in terms of really being clear with community members what we believe and sticking by those beliefs when people are pushing on us to do something different. But again, for me, that was almost an easy one at the end of the day because I don't believe we're taking away from one group to give to another. Just because we're reading 5 novels, or the choice includes 5 novels where all of the characters come from what I'll call a non-traditional family unit, does not mean we're taking away from kids who live in a traditional family unit. They see that represented everywhere all the time. It's okay to have novels and curriculum that shows different perspectives. So I feel really strongly about this issue. I think that it's something that we're going to have to be willing to engage in difficult conversations about going forward. I think that the socio-political climate is going to push a lot of people to ask questions that perhaps they might not have been bold enough to ask in the past. And we have to stand firm in what we believe is true.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ms. Robinson, will you please ask the next question?
Sorry about that. If you become our superintendent, one of your early decisions will be hiring an assistant superintendent. How will you approach your search, and what will you look for in your assistant superintendent?
Interesting. So in terms of approaching the search, I really believe in comprehensive search processes that include multiple stakeholders. So I would want to begin, of course, by forming a committee that would conduct the initial screening. I would want to engage in training for that committee around anti-bias work. I would want to reach out to the community, including families, students, and staff, around what their needs are in an assistant superintendent, and then take the results of that feedback and work with the committee that we established to write a standard of success, essentially, for what we're going to look for in candidates. I would want to work with stakeholders on developing a job description that is comprehensive and will help us to solicit the best possible candidates. And then we would engage in the search process. We would begin with, a first round of interviews. I love performance tasks. I think it really shows what people are doing and what they're capable of doing. And those performance tasks can be bringing a work product that they've already completed to sort of share with the committee. And then from there, we would open it up to additional stakeholders, much like what happened today, right? Where there was time for me to engage with families and staff and CPAC. I would want to go through a similar process for an assistant superintendent. Being an assistant superintendent now, it's a very big role. And they have a seat at the table for all major decisions. So I think we need to treat it as such and engage in a process that is comprehensive and includes lots of stakeholders. In terms of what I would look for, for me personally, I think teams are always best when they're diverse. And I don't just mean diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, although that is incredibly important, of course, but diversity in terms of experience. So I would want to consider what strengths I bring to the table and what experiences I bring to the table, and look for someone who could balance those strengths with different strengths and different experiences. I would want to reach out to the leadership team and spend a lot of time, again, listening to what their needs are. Coming in new, I certainly have my suspicions about what our needs are, and I can look at data and make some conclusions about what our needs are, but the people who are living it right now are the ones who are going to have the best perspective on what the needs are in that role of assistant superintendent. I would want to make sure that it's someone who, even if they hadn't yet been an assistant superintendent, understood the complexity of the role and understood the variety of the role, because it encompasses a lot. When you talk about teaching and learning, and you talk about curriculum and instruction and pedagogy and technology and interfacing with the community and facing curriculum challenges, that is a big job that really is at the heart of the academic achievement of our students. So I would want to ensure that it's someone who, again, even if they hadn't done that particular role, was ready to step into a role like that and had the skills and the experience to make that transition and do that.
Mayor Cahill, will you please ask the next question?
Do you think technology has really changed education beyond the bells and whistles that we all see? How do you see our district assessing our technological needs, and how would you go about looking at a technology plan for our future? Who would you involve in that discussion?
So I absolutely think that technology has expanded beyond just, bells and whistles, and it's an essential tool for the work that we do. We all use technology every day in our professional lives and in our personal lives, and our students need to be equipped to do that now and when they leave us at the end of graduation. It's an incredibly powerful tool when we want to talk about personalizing learning experiences as well. It can provide opportunities for collaboration. It can provide opportunities for engagement that perhaps we didn't even realize before COVID hit, dare I say, right? But we really kind of explored the power of technology when we faced that crisis, and we were able to leverage the opportunity that emerged in that crisis. And I will call it that, an opportunity. I think that we need to leverage the power that we have in our existing technology systems, our learning management systems, our data collection methodologies, and our instructional technology that we're using with students. And we need to do that through robust professional development so that we're using these tools to the best that they can be used. I also think we need to provide direct instruction for students. Yes, it has to be a part of what they're doing, but they also need direct instruction on how to use the tool effectively. I'll give a couple of brief examples. Our students use Google Classroom all the time. I'm sure your students probably do as well. But if you walk by, especially a middle schooler's Google platform, and you look at their folders, it can be alarming how many things are named untitled or January 2nd. No idea what the document is. They have no idea how to find it because we haven't taken the time to directly teach them how to organize your Google Drive in a way that's functional so that you can get what you need when you need it and be able to find it. So really just incorporating direct instruction for how to use the tools that we have at our disposal sounds simple, but it's actually a huge way to ensure that we're using technology effectively. AI, of course, already is something that we need to address. In Melrose, we're approaching it through robust professional development that is very targeted. So it's not just, what is AI and how do we use it, but it's how can we use AI to increase our own professional proficiency and efficiency. It's how can I use AI with learners who have unique needs to support their unique needs? How can I use AI to help my students learn how to edit writing in a particular way? It's not being afraid of it. We can't be afraid of it, because when kids leave our doors, they have it at their disposal. And if we've taught them nothing but fear, they're not going to know how to use that tool effectively. We have to embrace it and find a way to teach them responsible use so that they have those tools in their tool belt when they leave us and go beyond our doors. I have always considered the technology people that I work with as part of my leadership team. When I was a principal, we had an instructional technology specialist, and as far as I was concerned, he functioned very much as part of the leadership team. His role was to provide support for staff primarily in using instructional tools, but in that role and through that lens, he was also able to give me some tremendous insight on what staff needed and what students were using and accessing most. He also was able to identify needs that we had relative to teaching digital literacy, relative to teaching digital responsibility and citizenship, because he saw it firsthand when he went in to conduct lessons with staff and to implement different technology tools. And I'll share a funny story that I shared with the staff earlier. We had an incident when I was principal where we had a one-to-one Chromebook initiative, and we had blocked certain apps so they couldn't download games and things like that from the App Store on the Chromebook. But a very enterprising seventh grader found a way to access a whole list of gaming apps that were supposed to have been blocked, and decided to make an application process available to his fellow students. So if they wanted that list of applications that he found the workaround for, they had to apply, and then he determined whether or not they would be able to be selected to have that list of apps. Well, by the time we figured out what was happening, there were well over 100 kids who had this list of apps and were regularly accessing things that we thought we had blocked. So my instructional technology specialist brought it to me, and we sort of said, we've got to have a little bit of fun with this one because this is just too good. So I had an assistant principal who loved to dance, and she was a terrible dancer. She danced, all over the place, and she knew it, and the kids used to laugh at her for her dancing. And so we recorded her dancing wildly, and we played the Rick Astley Rickroll song, that never gonna give you up. We played that while she was dancing to it, and then we replaced every single one of the links on that document with that video of her dancing to that Rick Astley song. And then we walked around, and that was the best part, because we'd walk down the hall and you would hear all of a sudden in a classroom, "Never gonna give you up," start blaring, and immediately see the student panic and try and sort of get out of there. So I think we have to have fun with technology, but we have to teach responsible use. We cannot shy away from the tools that are out there. We can't just resort to blocking everything and taking the tools out of the hands of our students. We have to teach them how to use them responsibly. In terms of kind of creating a technology plan for the future, it has to be a conversation that includes lots of stakeholders. It has to include our staff. It has to include students. They know more than we do about what tools they're going to need in the future. It has to include our technology specialists that we have in the district, and it has to include parents. We have to hear from them about what they're seeing at home and what struggles they're having at home in terms of supporting their students to use technology appropriately. So it has to be a comprehensive review that includes multiple stakeholders. And I will just add this, although I know it's not really part of the question, our plan also has to be very budget focused, because maintaining and sustaining technology is expensive. And we need to be forecasting what we're going to need to spend in order to continue to engage in a technologically savvy world where we're giving kids the tools they need.
Okay, Ms. Coelho.
Thank you. Beverly has an operational sustainability committee to address all things green across our district. This work spans multiple departments and involves both our schools and the wider community. Can you share your experience with a similar initiative? Also, what do you see as your role in continuing the OSC in Beverly?
Sure. When I was the principal of Diamond, I mentioned we were engaged in a major building construction project. We were occupying the building during that construction project. And while it wasn't quite exactly a sustainability committee that focused just on doing all things green, it did involve lots of initiatives that would allow us some energy saving opportunities. As part of it, we built solar panels in the parking lot so that we could be harnessing some solar energy. We had TVs mounted around the school that would share with stakeholders walking into the building how we were using energy. We had things like automatic lights that would go off or dim depending on the sunlight that was coming into the room. We had automatic shades that would drop when the sunlight got to a certain level so that we could harness the energy that we wanted to harness. I think for me, the biggest thing was, and again, I feel like I'm repeating this, but it's true, engaging in conversation and getting people around the table to talk about what our goals are with these kinds of initiatives and how we can work together to really build and sustain anything that we want to implement. But for me, it was 3 years of working very closely with a construction team and with a contractor and with town officials and with our DPW, because part of it, when you're engaging in a building project, is the DPW who has to then maintain whatever it is that you're building going to be able to do that. So those were some of the things that I did, through my lens through that building project. In terms of, my role of continuing that work here in OSC, I would want to learn what you've done already. I did notice when I went to the middle school and as we drove around the electric charging stations, certainly I can see that these things are priorities. So I would want to learn more about what's already in place. What are we hoping to improve upon? Are we hoping to grow these initiatives? What does that look like? What is the impact of that growth? Are there people who are finding barriers with continuing to grow those initiatives, and what are those barriers, and how can we remove those barriers? Are they cost related, or is there something else that's creating a barrier for that work? And again, that comes through my taking the time to be present and to listen, to ask those questions, and to learn about the work that's happening and the work that is to be continued.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Mackenzie DeFranza, please, for the next question.
Thank you. As you lead the district, how would you use student performance results to prioritize use of resources, including money, technology, facilities, and human capital? And what are your views about using student achievement data to evaluate educators?
I've already mentioned that I believe strongly in the power of data. To me, it should not be threatening. It should not be weaponized, right? It is information. It tells us where our areas of growth are and where our areas for celebration are. And data is not just state test results, but it also includes data that we are getting from teachers who are in the classrooms every day working with students and telling us, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm seeing happening. Here are the questions that are coming up from families. Here are the places where I'm watching students struggle or where I'm finding a barrier to getting them to the next place. That's data as well that we need to consider as we're making those decisions. So in terms of using that data to prioritize the use of resources, including money, in my current role, I've done a lot of that work as it relates to curriculum products, instructional technology, assessment tools, things of that nature. And again, what we've said is, what are the absolute essentials that we feel like if we don't have them, we're going to see a dip in student achievement? And what are the things that we consider nice to haves, but we know we can replace them with things that either don't cost anything or things that cost less? I gave the example earlier of switching from a personalized instructional technology pathway to providing professional development to support staff in replacing that personalized pathway with instruction that's taking place in the classroom. So that's how I would use data to kind of support those. It's much more challenging when you're talking about human capital because it's human capital, right? So we need to be thinking about reallocating funds. We need to be thinking about restructuring rather than just eliminating. We need to be thinking about efficiencies. We need to be thinking about bringing programs back. We need to be thinking about in-house professional development. All of those cost-saving measures that will help us preserve as much human capital as we possibly can before we go, down that road of cutting people. In terms of evaluating educators, the supervision and evaluation process is really supposed to be about growth for all. And I hope and believe and want to be and strive to be a leader who can engage in difficult conversations around student growth that don't have to just be evaluative. I see my role as a coaching role as much as supervisor and evaluator. So in terms of using data to evaluate staff, I use data to coach staff all the time. I don't want for data to become a threat for them, however. And when you tie, a rubric and an evaluation strictly to data, you run that risk of feeling like if the student data isn't reflective of the work that I've been doing, my evaluation is going to suffer and, there's going to be major consequences. And when you do that, sometimes you put up a barrier because staff are less willing to try new things and to take risks as it relates to instruction. Really strong teachers function like scientists. They try something new based on a proposal that they think is going to work, and if it doesn't work, they adjust their course and they do something different. If we start tying evaluation strictly to data, we run the risk of staff not being willing to engage in trying new things like that for fear that their evaluation might be lowered because of the work that they were doing. In Lexington, when I was there, and I'm not suggesting that this is something we do, although I loved it, it was a tremendous thing, we took exemplary off the table. So we just said to all of our educators, we're just not using exemplary because we always should be working to continue growing. We always should be working to try new things and to take risks. And sometimes when you do that, things fail. And you have to be willing to look at those failures, evaluate why it failed, and make a different decision going forward. So for me, taking the pressure off of the evaluation system allowed for more robust, rich conversations about taking academic risks in a classroom to support students and push student growth. So data is incredibly important. I think we have to use it when we're looking at decisions around curriculum products and instructional tools. I think we have to use it when we're looking at the possibility of restructuring, especially as it relates to human capital. But I also think that if we use it for too many evaluative purposes, we're going to create a level of fear that could potentially put up some barriers for staff trying new things.
Dr. Silva, will you take question 13?
What does a successful district look like to you, and how would you define success over short term and over the long run?
Sure. I was asked the same question, interestingly enough, when I was interviewing to be the principal at Diamond Middle School. So, however many years ago, 13 years ago. And I remember it. I remember it very clearly because, again, I was coming into a building that was in sort of a cultural mess. The climate in the building was at an all-time low. Staff had lost trust in administration. They had lost trust in each other. There was a lot of conflict that was a part of daily existence. And so my answer to them is going to be a similar answer to what's happening here in Beverly. My first short-term definition of success is going to be that people are healing from what has happened, that they are moving forward collaboratively, and that they are happy to be a part of the Beverly community, and they are happy to be a part of the Beverly staff. That, to me, is going to be the first priority, and it's going to be incredibly, incredibly important. Now, as we do that, we cannot allow academic achievement to falter. So we have to keep our focus on what is most important, and that is student learning, plain and simple. And part of ensuring successful student learning and successful progress for students is ensuring that we have safe and inclusive spaces where students feel heard, represented, where we are centering those marginalized voices that have not previously been centered, and where we are letting the entire community know that all students belong here in our schools with us. So those two things have to happen simultaneously in order for me to truly feel like we have a successful school district. I think people need to want to be here. They need to be happy. They need to feel like we have moved on from previous harm and we're working collaboratively and we're communicating effectively. And students need to be achieving at high levels. We need to see growth in our scores. We need to see that whether they are struggling to access curriculum or whether they come in knowing all the standards, we are providing opportunities in safe, inclusive spaces for them to continue to grow and develop as students.
Thank you. We have a 14th question and then an opportunity for your closing statement. I guess I'll just read the 14th question unless you want to. Okay. So the question reads, how do you think parents in the community you've served would describe your leaderships and approach? Beyond attending school events, what are some of the ways you plan to connect and engage with Beverly's families, especially those who might not have always been involved?
So I hope and I think that families who have worked closely with me would say that I am honest, that I am a straight shooter, but that I do that with empathy and understanding. I try, as I've said many times, to really listen carefully to what families are sharing with me and what is at the heart of what they're sharing. You know, earlier tonight, I had a parent here who was expressing some concerns about some things that his daughter's going through, and I could hear the pain in his voice. And I didn't have an instant solution for him. It was a very complex problem that he was describing, but hearing that pain really told me that, you know, he was struggling with this. And I think that parents who I've worked with will tell you that when that happens, I take that on personally, and I feel like it's my responsibility to then do something about that and to open a line of dialogue to see if we can find mutually agreeable solutions for those things. I've had a few experiences where I've had tremendous connections with parents years after the fact. I shared one earlier when that mom ran up to me at that Best Buddies event. And again, it was over a decade ago. But not only did she remember me and say hello, and I was an assistant principal at that time, but she knew I would help her child still. And she knew that I could. So she knew the work that I had done with her child and that I would still be able to connect with her child then. You know, I shared earlier with the leadership team that I had a relationship with a lot of our Boston families. In Lexington and in Melrose, we have the MECO program. And so oftentimes having our Boston families connect brings with it an extra level of challenge because they're far away, geographically speaking. And so we had to do some different reach out in terms of bringing our Boston families into the Lexington and the Melrose community. And I spent a lot of time working to ensure that I had strong relationships with our families from Boston. And a couple of years ago, I was at the MECO conference, and a mom came running across the room to give me a hug because she remembered me again from, you know, over a decade ago when I had done work with her children. I still keep in touch with families that I've worked with, that I worked with in Attleboro. When I mentioned that I had gone there after my initial teaching experience, I was only there for 2 years, but I looped. I had the same group of kids for 2 years, and I still keep in touch with those families and hear about what they're doing and what their students are doing. So I think what you would hear is that I truly am someone who genuinely cares, and I believe in those relationships that we form with one another. My communication style with families has always been, you know, as I mentioned earlier, to communicate regularly, to communicate openly, to be transparent, and to include as part of my outward going communication something about soliciting feedback and inviting families into the school community to engage in conversation and to engage in dialogue. So beyond just attending school events, you know, I would plan to use the communication systems that we have set up, or perhaps I'll develop my own systems and structures to ensure that there's that two-way communication available for all families. Another thing that I've worked really hard on doing, and in Melrose, it's been a focus of my work, I would say, is finding ways to engage with families who struggle to engage. So currently in my role, I'm the director of the ELL department. We have an LPAC, which is, you know, similar to CPAC, but for the families of multilingual learners. And I've struggled to really build up participation in that group. So what we've done is I've spent a lot of time with my EL staff talking about what the barriers could be. Is it that they can't come into the building? Let's try virtual meetings. Is it that they are worried about the translation that's part of those meetings? Let's look at our translation services and how we can best support them to be able to participate in those meetings. I asked them directly. I put out a survey and said, what's keeping you from participating in this? What I heard from them is they didn't feel they had anything to offer. So then what we did is we came up with topics, and we said, you know, if you have questions, even if you don't feel like you have something to offer, if you have questions about this topic, great opportunity for you to be a part of this meeting and engage with us about this particular topic. So I do think that there are ways that we can really find out what the barriers are, if there are barriers in place, and kind of break those barriers down. I had a really wonderful experience, you know, during our public budget hearings, which aren't always so fun, especially when you have a large budget deficit that you're trying to overcome. But I actually had a parent speak on my behalf at one of those budget hearings and share with the school committee in Melrose that she was really happy with the work that I have been doing in Melrose, and she was worried about my team because we're losing all of our directors in Melrose. So that felt really good, right? To be home and watching the school committee meeting and see that a parent in the community was recognizing the work that I've been doing in Melrose, which is mostly behind the scenes because that's the role I'm in right now. But she saw it and recognized the importance of it and was able to advocate to the school committee that that work I've been doing with my directors is important and needs to stay. So that's what I think you'd hear. I think that families who know me and get to know me understand that I truly believe in the work that I do, and I believe in the power of us working collaboratively with the families that we serve.
Thanks. And I guess this is your opportunity now to give us your closing remarks.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to share with all of you a little bit of what I shared with the search committee in my initial round of interviews. And that is, I want to tell you just a little bit about kind of who I am as a person and what my moral imperative is for doing this work, because I've done this work now for 29 years. And there's a reason why I stay here and why I do this work. For me, the work that we do as educators is the most important work in the world that can be done. And I don't say that lightly. And I'll share on a personal note, I have a younger brother with significant disabilities. He'll probably be living with my husband and I in the very near future. And I saw and lived firsthand the incredible impact that his success or struggle had on our family unit as a whole. When things were going well for him in school, things were going well for us at home. And when things were not going well for him in school, it impacted the entire family unit and our functioning and what we were able to do and what we were able to accomplish as a family. So when I hear those questions about how do you engage families and, kind of why do you do that work and how do you stand firm in supporting students who might otherwise be marginalized, it means something to me deep in my core. It is incredibly important that we are here for all of the students that we service. And I believe in this work because of that personal experience that I had. It's why I got my master's in special education. It's why I felt that before becoming a building level administrator, I needed more experience in special education because it's important. I have 3 children of my own. I don't think that you have to have children to be in a role like this, but for me, it's been helpful because I run a lot of my communication through the lens of me as a mom. I'll read something and say, if I'm receiving this as a mom, how am I taking this? Is this message making me happy? Do I feel like it's communicated enough, or is there something missing? And that's been an important lens for me, and it has helped to kind of keep me in check throughout my educational journey. I also have 3 children who are extraordinarily different. I hope they're not watching tonight, but, my oldest was very focused on academics, and I had to do very little in terms of intervening or offering help and support for her. My middle daughter has her priorities very much in line, and it goes athletics, partying and having a great time, and then maybe some academics if there's a little bit of time for it. Very different approach with how we supported her through her educational journey, and very different approach with how we talked about pathways for success for her, because they looked quite different from my older daughter. And my son is very academic minded. And in fact, my support for him is really in the social emotional realm. I want for him to be happy. I want for him to enjoy being in school and really expand his group of friends and feel like he's capitalizing on all the experience that he's had and maybe pull away a little bit from some of the academics and the focus that he's had. So having experienced that and understanding that really gives me a lens of empathy when I hear about families that are struggling with different children, or when I hear about teachers who have 20 different learners in front of them who all need incredibly different things and who all need incredibly personalized learning experiences. Right? The work is hard and it's incredibly important. So I want you to hear that because it's who I am as a person. And then the last thing I'll say, is this. I have done a lot over the course of my career. I've been very lucky. Maybe some would say unlucky, that I have experienced things that I would say many people who are sitting in my seat as assistant superintendents have not experienced. I led a very large middle school, as I mentioned, through a major building construction project where we had, and I'm not making this up, The library was set on fire. We had a flood in the middle of our main hallway. We had to evacuate twice for gas leaks that were, once was like a geyser of gas that we had to evacuate for. Major traffic accidents during the restructuring of a parking lot system. I mean, major challenges that I had to lead through and keep the community together through these major challenges while ensuring that students were safe and that academic progress was continuing. Right when we finished the building construction project, COVID hit. And I led Diamond through COVID. And I'll say this, we wrote in Lexington our blueprints for success during COVID before the state released theirs. And the state actually used our blueprint as their model for when they then put out a model for other districts. So we were right on the forefront of that work. We did an incredible amount of work in Lexington to, again, ensure that we were providing access for all students. One of the things I'm most proud of is that during that time, I ran a project-based learning academy for students who were having trouble accessing academics and for students who needed a little something extra, because it gave them a different way to approach our online learning that we had implemented during COVID. We had just started a brand new middle school schedule. And when we came out of COVID, what we did was say, you know what, that middle school schedule was pretty okay, but we've learned a lot from having to schedule 2 hybrid rotating cohorts through COVID. And we want to now make some changes, one of which sounds minor, but we never gave kids a break in middle school. And having to have mask breaks in COVID taught us the incredible importance of giving kids a moment to breathe, quite literally, and have a break. And so we modified our schedule to build that in. So I've had a lot of experiences that I think give me the knowledge that I need to come into this role with confidence, knowing that I'm ready to do it and I'm ready to tackle, whatever challenges may lie ahead. In Melrose, again, I've had three years, 3 different superintendents, 3 very different leadership styles, and my task has really been to build systems and structures that will keep the district stable and moving forward despite all of that leadership change. I wrote the district's strategic plan. I wrote the bullying prevention and intervention plan. I impact bargained the use of the 2024 rubric with our teachers union. I sat on the negotiating team with our administrators who are Teamsters. Well, that's an interesting negotiation to go through. I moved our supervision and evaluation system from an archaic, outdated paper-based system to a technology platform. I restructured how we calculated PDPs for salary upgrade. I did 2 tiered focus monitoring, integrated focus monitoring audit processes through DESE. And in one of them, I came in during year 2 and we had 7 findings that I had to pull the district out of with new systems and structures. So I have had experiences that I think far transcend what a typical pathway might look like for someone who's gone from assistant principal, assistant superintendent. And so because of that, I'm ready. I'm ready for this role, and I feel very confident that this is the time and this is the place. So I'm honored to have been here. I had a great day today. I'm exhausted. I'm going to sleep well tonight, but that's good. And I thank you for taking the time to go through this, because it's an important process. The work we do matters a lot. So thank you.
We thank you so much for visiting with us.
Of course.
Are you looking for a motion to adjourn?
I would like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Visnick. Would someone like to second that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Not debatable. We're all present in person. All those in favor? 7-0. It's 9:06. Thank you so much, BevCam. Thank you for those of you who joined us in the audience, and safe travels. We'll be in touch.